Hi students, I promised you chapter 3 of Bennett, so here's my short lecture on that. And topics include the following. We have ethos, pathos, logos. We have audience, evidence, two types of reasoning. Now she goes into evidence in more detail, primary sources, secondary sources, so you should probably know that. And so I haven't gone into a lot of detail on that. I have gone into inductive and deductive reasoning in some detail because I think it's important. And this week you're going to have to post your own inductive argument and your own deductive argument, so and comment on 3 other students, so be prepared to do that. And then we'll be moving on to poetry this week as well. Okay, so let me go over ethos, pathos, logos. So basically, those are about persuasion. How do you persuade? So let me go to the board here a little bit. So ethos has to do with character, the character of the person or the material being presented. So for example, let's go to Marx and Engels' Communist Manifesto, since you've already looked at that. Their ethos, character, the material. Well, I think they're a little too aggressive to be convincing, but the material about the working hours, child labor, etc., that does show some knowledge of the situation. Okay, but their overall character of the writers, probably not the best. Now contrast that with Washington. Washington, very clear prose, very good tone, inclusive, generous tone. So he's got a much better character overall if you were grading it, you know. Okay, so pathos or pathos has to do really with emotion. So are they presenting emotional arguments? So I think both used them to some extent. There have been other pieces done by Marx and Engels, especially Engels, on the working conditions of the English poor and just how terrible that was, and going into detail about their housing and the no running water, no electricity, nothing. So that would be arousing the reader's sympathy, emotion. So if you've seen those commercials, well, the children's hospital, showing the kids and how sick they are and no hair on their heads, shaved heads and everything from the chemotherapy. I mean, that's very effective. There's also the pet adoption one where it shows all these sick dogs and blind and 3 legs and no tail, no fur. So that's very pathetic, arousing emotion to people who are pet lovers. Okay, so the one that should be most important, I would think, but I have a long story I could tell about argument over which is most important, but so it's probably ethos, but in my view, it really should be logos, the reasons that the reader gives. That's what should move people. Okay, not arguments, not appeals to emotion or to character. Okay, because we could have very slick politicians that appeal to character instead of have good reasons, and we've fallen into that trap more than once. Okay, by probably 45 times in U.S. presidential history. Okay, so logos has to do with reasons, presenting reasons, statistics, logical ways to reach your readers and convince them. And so you want to come across as being logical and organized, and that has to do, and of course your material too. So in your papers, essay number 1, I'll be looking for that. What are your arguments? And have you used reason to convince me? So for me, that's going to be number 1. Okay, let's move on to audience. So you need to always think, who's your audience? Well, yeah, it's mainly your teacher, but it's also other students, it's the tutoring, writing center, the World Wide Web, if you're posting it on the internet, on Canvas, and obviously for me, well, other students and for me. Okay, so that's audience. Think about that. Normally we don't sit down and think about, oh, who am I writing for? I mean, that seems silly, but we should. We should do it. Who are we trying to convince? Let's go to Marx and Engels. They know who their audience is. It's the working class people that are going to hear that speech, that are going to read that in different pamphlets. Remember, they used to publish a lot of pamphlets on different social issues in Europe. Probably less so now with social media. And who was the audience in Up From Slavery? Well, basically white Christians who would be sympathetic towards smart guys like Booker T. Washington. Okay, so yeah, white Christians who would be for, slaves moving up, being educated, being able to have some job opportunities and certainly some educational opportunities. Okay, what today we would call separate but equal, but, well, not really equal. We've seen that wasn't quite the case. Okay. So evidence. So what kind of evidence? She goes into primary and secondary. I'm more interested in, are they reasons? Are they statistics, stories, anecdotes? So I would say statistics, if they're from a good source, would be very important. So I'm not as interested in primary and secondary as I am in, okay, are they good sources? Are they good numbers? Are they good reasons? Are they good stories? Are they persuasive in terms of reason, not those other things? Okay? All right, so now let's go into the two types of reasoning, and she goes into these in some detail, so read the chapter carefully. So let me go over the two types. So inductive reasoning goes from examples or particular to a general conclusion. Okay? And so you're going to use inductive reasoning in statistics, social science like sociology, psychology, even English class to some extent, doing your, well, at least, Comp 101. So you go from the particulars to a general conclusion. So what do we mean by that? Particulars meaning particular cases, particular examples. Look at my example over there about cars. So Nissan is good, so is Honda, so is Toyota. Therefore, all Japanese cars are good. So what am I doing there? I'm giving examples of Japanese cars, and then I'm drawing a general conclusion. Okay, so we do this all the time in our papers, reasoning, and that's important, of course. So again, what do we really mean by this? I'm giving particular examples. Nissan is a good example of a car. Honda is a good example. Reliable to, at least up to 150,000 miles. Toyota, same thing. They're reliable, economical, good quality, decent price as long as you negotiate. And I'm drawing I'm drawing a general conclusion, not a specific conclusion, a general conclusion on this one. Therefore, all Japanese cars are good. Now, what's wrong with that? Well, what if there was a Japanese car that wasn't as good? Okay? So I'm not going to go into details on that. Maybe Lexus isn't as good, or Acura, or Acura. Maybe they're not as good for the money. So you could say, so what's the problem with inductive reasoning? Well, you're making a pretty general conclusion. So let's say Acura, for the money, the cars aren't worth it. Then you could say, well, therefore all Japanese cars are good, except maybe Acura. So you'd have to qualify it. But that's the weakness of it. You're giving a bunch of particular instances and then you're drawing a general conclusion. So that it's not the best argument, okay? So the better argument is the following. Number 2, deductive reasoning. Look at this, and you can see how it's swapped to, but the premises, of course, premises just means the assumptions, these first 2 lines here. I mean, the assumptions, yeah, they're going to take some, it's going to take some work to build those and make those credible, but the format of the argument is probably better. So deductive reasoning, general to particular, or examples, okay? So who uses deductive reasoning? Math, logic, philosophy to a large extent, although philosophy doesn't really do a lot of, they don't really have proofs. They should have more, but they don't. So I'm kind of critical of modern contemporary analytical philosophy where they don't do proofs, which I think are important, where you should have deductive reasoning. So what's an example of deductive reasoning? All Japanese cars are good. So that's your first premise or assumption. Second assumption is Honda is a Japanese car. That's not really too controversial, other than the fact that they probably build as many Hondas in the U.S. now, in Alabama or wherever, as in Mexico, as in, like, I think the SUVs, some of the SUVs are actually built in Mexico, unless you get the top-notch CRV. Okay, so those are the premises, or the assumptions, and then you're drawing the conclusion, which is, therefore, Honda is a good car. So let's read over that again so you get it, because I even get confused on these myself. So all Japanese cars are good. So that's your first premise. Honda is a Japanese car. Therefore, Honda is a good car. Okay? So I hope I didn't screw that up. So let me show you in terms of symbolic logic real fast what that is. Okay? So symbolic logic, you're going to go, and I hope you can see this. Got the whole computer, whole thing falling down. Okay? So you're going to have, for deductive, P implies Q. Okay? So P would refer to all Japanese cars. Q would mean good. Then you're going to have a specific example, P, which is one of those Japanese cars, Honda. Therefore, and that's the symbol you use in when you take your symbolic logic or logic. Okay? And then Honda is a good car. Therefore, Q. Okay? So, P again refers to all Japanese cars are good. Well, more or less. P, Honda is a Japanese car, therefore Honda's going to be a good car. Okay, so that's called symbolic logic. You're just taking the concepts and you're putting it in a more mathematical or logical format. Okay. Now, can you do that also with inductive? I'll probably save that for another time. What else do we need to talk about? Bennett talks about fallacies. We've done that. Remember, the key thing with fallacies is, so even if you look, you could accuse every politician, almost every speaker, every writer of a fallacy or fallacies. If you look at the list, I mean, there's so many. Naturalistic fallacy. There's all kinds of sneaky moves you can make that speakers, politicians, writers, journalists, philosophers, people in social science, educators are terrible at logic. But so you can find fallacies in almost every one. But what Bennett probably does not cover is you need to give that person, that educator, politician, journalist, a chance to explain, okay, to answer back. So you accuse them of a fallacy, and so you need to give them a chance to answer and clarify. And the previous president had way too many opportunities to do that and still made a lot of blunders. So I'm not letting anybody off the hook, not Biden or Biden, as they call him on some places on the internet, and not Trump, not Clinton, not Bush, not Obama. They're all their speaking, writings filled with fallacies, but you need to point it out and then say, could you please answer that, okay? All right, so that's all I'm going to say about fallacies. Most important thing to take away from this lecture is, it's over 15 minutes, which is too bad, inductive, deductive reasoning. Study that part over and over again. I'm going to sign off because I'm over 15 minutes. See you soon. Bye.